Madeline, I just want to do a check to make sure you can hear me.
I can hear you.
Wonderful. All right. So thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. We're happy to have you with us today to review the recently enacted federal legislation that provides a sizable influx of federal funds into the Child Care Development Block Grant. In today's webinar, we'll be providing an overview of the federal law, and then we will review some of the draft considerations that the Texas Workforce Commission is considering. And we've left half the meeting to hear from you. We have broad representation on this call today from child care centers and homes, advocacy organization, and our boards and their child care contractors. And we also invited the Texas Early Learning council members to join us. We know that there's a lot of interest in how these funds will be spent. And while we won't have any answers for you today, we do want to be as transparent as possible as we're in the planning and development stage for these new federal funds. All right, so let's get started on our overview of the Child Care COVID Response and Relief Funding that was included in the Federal Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021. In the meeting invitation, we provided a link to the TWC Child Care webpage. And under the section on stakeholder input, we have posted a document with all of the information that we will present today on the webinar. And we're also recording this, and we'll post a link to this webinar so that folks that weren't able to join us today will still be able to review this information. So I think, as everyone knows, this legislation provides an additional $10 billion for the Child Care Development Block Grant. The bill was signed into law on December 27th, and this week, on Wednesday, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services notified us that Texas will receive just over $1.1 billion. $1,135,748,591. A very, very big number. It's a one-time investment of funds, so we really want to carefully consider how we consider investing this, because these funds aren't available year over year. But I will say, on our regular annual block grant, we also saw a small federal increase this year of $85 million. We haven't yet received information on how much each state is receiving in their regular annual child care allotment. So we're not sure exactly how much of an increase we'll see in our regular annual allotment of child care funds. And I am hearing some background noise, but I think it's gone now. Okay. So as I said, we don't know yet just how much we'll receive from that $85 million increase to our regular federal allotment. Hopefully we'll hear that soon, but today we're really focused on the new federal COVID response and relief funds. And we really want to hear from you to help us understand where the needs are and how TWC should consider our plans for the use of these funds. So first I'll walk through an overview of the legislation, then we'll review some of the draft considerations on spending the funds, and we'll spend the remainder of the time hearing from you. So this legislation is very flexible. It allows states to use the funds on any allowable CCDBG activity. And as part of this flexibility, states get to determine how much they want to use for direct child care versus how much they want to spend on quality improvement activities. They've given states until the end of September of 2022 to get all of the funds obligated or into contract, and then we have an additional year to spend them. So all of the funds have to be expended by the end of September of 2023. There are just a few requirements in the law that we want to highlight. States can't supplant state funding with these new funds. So states can't reduce their state general revenue expenditures and replace them with this federal money. The law also requires all states to use a portion of the funds to support non-CCDF eligible providers. The law doesn't say exactly how much of the grant must be used for this purpose, just that a portion of funds must be used. So this means that TWC will consider how we support licensed centers, licensed homes, and registered homes who haven't been part of the subsidy system in the past. States must also widely publicize the availability of funds and provide technical assistance to help providers apply for the funding. And finally, states are required to submit a plan describing how the funds will be used. So now we'd like to walk through some of the ideas that we're considering. And again, I'll note that these are still very much in the draft stage. So first, we're looking at how we support all eligible child care providers, including non-subsidy providers. So through a new grant to all provider program, we're looking at the possibility of one-time grants that TWC would administer. And we're also considering how we would make this grant application process as simple as possible. We're looking at entering into grant agreements with 13,000 or 14,000 providers. And in order to implement something of this magnitude quickly and efficiently, we could develop grant amounts that are scaled based on the type of provider and the license capacity of the program. And then as part of the calculation, we might consider a provider's Texas Rising Star status. If we use this type of methodology to determine the provider grant amounts, it would likely provide a quicker, simpler process and allow us to expedite the implementation of thousands and thousands of grants. We're also thinking about the documentation requirements that will be needed. Since these are grant funds, there are standard federal grant requirements that have to be followed. Anyone that receives a grant has to maintain documentation on how they spent the funds. And we're also looking at how to provide technical assistance. And we're thinking about how business coaches might be used to help not only with questions about TWC's one-time grants, but also with how you might be able to access other federal supports like those that the Small Business Administration has available. So secondly, one of the things we're considering is potentially increasing the amount of money that we provide to our local workforce boards for our regular subsidized child care program. These increased funds could be used to serve more kids in the subsidy program. And then for our Texas Rising Star programs, we're looking at a few possible strategies. So first, we could use some of this money to support contracted slots. As many of you know, TWC just enacted our new contracted slots rules, and boards now have the option of implementing these with 3- and 4-star providers in order to expand the capacity of quality childcare. So that's one potential strategy that would be open for Texas Rising Star providers. We're also considering how we can better educate and outreach parents about the quality, about the importance of selecting quality childcare, and about Texas Rising Star. This kind of education and outreach campaign is something that we have previously received feedback on. In fact, our most recent Texas Rising Star work group made this recommendation. And we've heard this from several Texas Rising Star providers in the past. And we're also considering if we should implement new one-time incentive payments to assist new providers entering Texas Rising Star with some of the additional costs of providing quality childcare. All right, so in this next category of childcare sort of supply capacity building, we've got several initiatives listed here. You'll see that we've included both PreK Partnership expansion and support for family childcare. Both of these are activities that we have supported in the past. Additional funding could be used to expand support for those two strategies. We've also got a few new activities, like assisting in the development of employer site-based childcare. We might also look at articulation agreements. We've got a lot of community colleges offering early education degrees, and we could have an opportunity to help support the articulation of that community college credit into credit at universities. An apprenticeship is another possible area of focus. We had our first registered apprenticeship program in Fort Worth, and we could look at supporting the development of new registered apprenticeship programs in the state. And along with that, we could consider how the education received in an apprenticeship program could be articulated into community college credit. And then we have a couple of other possible investment areas, one into shared services, which you should all be familiar with, and then possibly looking at how do we build capacity in the supply of childcare in our rural areas. All right, we've also thought about some of the supports for the early childhood professionals. We have invested funds previously into professional development scholarships. We could look at some increased investment in this area to expand the availability of those scholarships, and potentially a new activity on how we can provide training on children's health and social emotional development. This is an area that, especially since COVID, we've heard a lot of feedback on the need to consider the social emotional health of children. And then our last slide is really looking at some of the reports and studies that we could possibly invest in. Most of these are existing studies or reports that are out. We have one new one. We have the Texas Core Competencies for Early Childhood Practitioners and Administrators, the Infant and Toddler Early Learning Guidelines. There's a new Workforce Strategic Plan on early childhood education. There is some proposed legislation on this. And then, of course, there were two reports that were developed using that preschool development grant that the Texas Early Learning Council worked on, the Early Childhood Needs Assessment and the ECE Strategic Plan. So that really is kind of at a very high level, some of the considerations that we've been thinking about with these new funds. And what we wanted to do today was really spend some time hearing from you about your thoughts on where the needs are and what we might want to consider as we're investing these funds. So with that, I would like to open it up either for input through the chat mechanism or input. You can unmute yourself and you can talk to us directly.
So Reagan, this is Allison. We have one question in the chat already. How much does Texas provide to childcare through state general revenue?
I don't have that number exactly, but I'm going to say it's somewhere around 100 million.
Reagan, this is Cynthia Pearson. So when you're
Cynthia.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Good to hear from you.
Yeah, it's good to hear from you too and to see your face. So when you talked about incentives for new Texas Rising Star providers, can you say a little bit more about that? The reason I'm asking is we, opened a new center last year and just had them go through their assessment. So is it too late for that consideration?
Yeah, we were thinking that a small, a small one-time grant might help new providers that are getting into to Texas Rising Star with some of those one-time costs that they might have to help improve the quality of care. So you could spend those on curriculum or assessment tools or any of those things that that you need to implement as you're moving into a quality improvement system.
But that wouldn't apply to an additional center for us that already is a part of TRS. Is that what you're saying?
No decision on that. I think hearing your comment, we'll put that down as an area for consideration.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And then I see a question in the chat about investing in the class tool. So I will point out, and the comment was that there are some recess grants that have used the class tool, and have we considered providing funding to support class, possibly training TRS mentors. So I will say that we have not considered specific support for the class tool because anything that we do has to be competitively procured. So we don't support any one particular instrument. Right now, our criteria for Texas Rising Star includes similar types of criteria that class looks at. But if we were ever to invest in a private entity's assessment tool, we would have to do a competitive procurement for that type of purchase. All right, we have a few questions on racial equity initiatives. Certainly racial equity is something that's considered in the implementation of all types of activities. We don't have anything specifically aimed on that, but it certainly is fundamental in the implementation of any of those strategies. We have a recommendation on looking into studying a true cost of quality study. So we'll note that as some additional input. We also see that there is support for capacity building in rural areas. Specifically, we heard that request coming from our Middle Rio Grande workforce partners. So we'll make a note of that. All right, supports for infants and toddlers. So we're happy to add that to the list. If anybody has specific recommendations that they'd like us to consider, please let us know. And I will tell you guys, as you're entering information into the chat, we also have on our Stakeholder webpage an email address that you can use to send in additional input. So if you think of something after this call, go to our webpage and you'll see how you can email us with additional thoughts and considerations. Oh, and Allison, thank you. Allison has put that email address into the chat so you can all see that. I see a question about an awareness campaign for parents about Texas Rising Star. And yes, that was included on the list. We also have a comment about encouraging TWC to think about employer-sponsored childcare. We had included employer site-based childcare on our initial draft list. So I think that aligns with this recommendation about how we might incentivize employers to help them subsidize the care of the employees' children as well. All right, then we have a comment. Texas is one of 11 states that have not offered financial support to all licensed providers yet. Will they consider grants based on license capacity as many other states have? I believe that many providers would like to ensure that accreditation agencies are also considered as a qualifier for those who do not have TRS. So thank you for that input on national accreditation in addition to TRS. And we are, with this much larger pot of federal money, we are looking at how we would provide grants to all eligible CCDF providers. So that would be inclusive of those non-subsidy providers as well. And as I mentioned, we are thinking about how do you create a simple framework because just the sheer volume of entering into 13,000, 14,000 distinct grant agreements is a heavy lift. And so the simpler we can make it, the easier it will be for us to get that money out so you guys have access to it quickly. All right. Anybody else want to unmute and provide any comments? Or feel free to use the chat.
Reagan, this is Keith Huddleston. Hear me?
Hi, Keith.
Hi, how are you?
Good, good.
Okay, we have a local policy that when a provider completes the application for the Texas Rising Star, then our mentors, assessors meet with the provider, and I can't remember exactly the amount of money that we allow the provider to buy different items with that the mentors have determined that are in need to assist with quality. So we strongly recommend that for the providers that you already had mentioned. And then I don't know if this can happen, but also in our policy, when the provider reaches the TRS 3 or 4 star standard, then we have an incentive for the staff who work at the center. And then we also, later on, when they go through their reassessment, we provide funds again to help the provider with quality to get, prepare for the reassessment. And then once again, we provide a small incentive to the staff who, they all assisted in becoming TRS.
Thanks for that input, Keith.
You're welcome.
All right, other thoughts or comments?
Hi,
Wait, I actually have one. Oh,
All right, who was that?
well, there was two. My name's Heather. Can you hear me?
Yes, Heather, I can hear you.
Okay. When the slide that you put up about professional development, I love that one, to have money put towards that. I have several staff that I would love to see get their CDA. So scholarships to sponsor that would be great. However, it'd be great if we could add a little extra funding for that, because legally, if I send my infant teacher to go get her CDA in the evening time, and if I'm requiring that, I have to pay her for the hours that she's in training, which it's a great way to, if we can get scholarships to cover the cost of the actual curriculum itself, which is great, but is there a way to actually get a little extra so it can cover the training hours in which I am paying my staff to go to? Is there a way we can maybe couple that with an extra stipend of income to offset that extra cost?
Okay, again, I don't have any answers today, but we can certainly put it on the list.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for the input. Yeah, thank you. All right, and I see I see one chat that supporting this idea of parent education and outreach. All right, and then I think, Craig, you were about to say something.
Yes. Craig Jefferson with Tarrant County CCMS. And I was wondering, are there any funds set aside for like CCMS staff? I notice a lot of staff going through COVID fatigue, a lot of stress, a lot of, just a lot of different things, due to COVID. And, I was wondering if there's anything set aside for like, contract staff, because I notice a lot of our staff who are, kind of going through it. People are not able to socialize as much. So that's a big factor. People aren't able to exercise as much. That's a big factor. So we are really trying to promote, health and wellness in our organization, but I was just wondering if we're looking at anything from, the contractors and assistance for staff.
All right. Thank you for that input.
Thank you.
You bet. And a question about the 25% enhancement. At this point, the enhanced reimbursement rate is on its sort of scale down plan through the end of the summer, with the hopes that with the vaccine, we start to get back to something that looks a little bit more normal, with folks returning to daily activities, and hopefully parents returning their children to childcare centers. So at this point, no, but I think, as you all know, we continue to review and make revisions to policies that were adopted. I think if you look back at at the beginning of COVID, we actually took some policy actions that we then went back and made changes to. So we do continually look to see what we've put in place and if potential revisions are needed. Other thoughts or comments that folks want to share verbally or in chat?
Hey, this is Rob Staley. We purchased a couple of child care centers in 2020. One in particular was 3-star certified, TRS certified when we acquired it in August. And in October, we received an email from TRS saying that there were 2 material deficiencies by the prior owner back in February, of which we were completely unaware, and that those deficiencies caused the TRS certification to be stripped. So we lost it in October, having no idea that was coming. And of course, we then fall into the category of having to wait 12 months before we can reapply. But because we were not notified of this beforehand, and because there seems to be a lot of this support that's tied to TRS certification, I'm wondering if there might be some type of a waiver for our very rare situation. I acknowledge that it's a very rare situation, whereby we may be able to work to have our TRS certification reinstated. Otherwise, that's going to be kind of a double hit to us in that we lost the bonus benefit we've already lost that, but now we would potentially lose the opportunity to receive some of this funding that may end up being tied to TRS. So I just wanted to put that out there and see who I might be able to speak to about that in some more detail and see if there might be an opportunity for us to gain that back.
So this is Allison. I'm not sure which board area that operation is in, but from the period of time of like March through up until October 1st, we were, considering the impact of COVID, and boards were able to send up requests to us, to my team, to look at any star level impact or certification loss on a case-by-case basis. So we can certainly review the situation with your operation and let you know if there's any flexibility at all.
Okay, thank you, Allison. And this is Allison Wilson, correct? I just want to make sure that I have the right person to reach out to.
And I will add my email to the chat so you can send it to me.
Thank you very much.
All right, so we've had a few comments come in suggesting that we use the additional federal funds for more direct support for centers. So I believe the comment says that studies, partnerships, professional development are all great areas for investment, but the pandemic has created real economic challenges. Direct support to centers is critical. We have another person who was echoing the previous comment, I believe, about the potential support for the hourly wage that's required when staff attend required professional development after hours. Cassie, we did not hear your verbal question, so I think you have entered it below, so I'll get to that. We also have a recommendation to consider PreK Partnership because of the potential it has for building and sustaining quality programs and increasing compensation for all staff participating in the center. And then we have a comment about how much of this federal grant is going to be used for each of these activities. And so I think this is, like I said, we have not made any decisions. This is where we're very interested in hearing from all of our stakeholders on what their thoughts are. This recommendation was echoing what Seth said, that direct support to child care providers is their priority. they'd like to see 70% of the funds going directly to centers. All right. We had a question about, are we going to add any requirements in to receive the grants, such as making sure that they're in good standing with licensing? As I said, we don't have we know how much money we're getting, and we have the language in the law itself. And the law itself says you have to make funding available to eligible CCDF providers that were not previously receiving funding, which in Texas is our licensed centers, licensed homes, and registered homes. So we're not sure about permissibility to add on additional eligibility criteria. We have a question then about subsidy amounts, and is there a plan to continue subsidy amounts, and then the notation, which I guess those would be permanent. And I will say this is one of the considerations that we have to look at with this money. This is a great investment federally, but this is a one-time infusion of funds. And so we want to be careful about how we invest it, because if you invest in something that requires year-over-year dollars, you just really have to take that into consideration. I will say that over the past, I think it's been 2.5, maybe 3.5 years now, when the law was reauthorized, we did implement a significant increase for our Texas Rising Star providers. Again, part of this was our desire to see more providers pursue Texas Rising Star certification so that more of our subsidy referrals have access to quality childcare. So we benchmark those against the 75th percentile of the most recent market rate survey. In Texas, we go beyond the minimum market rate survey that federally is only required every 3 years, and we do a market rate survey every year. And so over the past 3 years, we have been re-benchmarking all of our rates against the new market rate survey, which has resulted in year-over-year increases in our childcare rates. So just wanted to make sure and make that observation. We have a question about clients that have lost their childcare services due to COVID or because they're not working enough hours. This is something that we are actively looking at right now. We do understand that there are parents who generally qualify for these types of services, and because of COVID, we are seeing those reductions in work hours. So this is something that we're looking at now to try to determine if there's some flexibility that we might be able to consider during COVID. We certainly appreciate that comment. Okay, so we also have a comment about support for childcare for ISD teachers, because they're a potential source for increasing the number of teachers so let me read it. Support for childcare for ISD teachers, which could increase the number of teachers who drop out of the workforce to care for their children. Certainly looking at ISD teachers is a resource for us. I think we used to have some flexibility in using the background checks that are conducted by ISDs. Now, keep in mind, this is something on the HHSC childcare regulation front. Based on our discussions with childcare regulation, there was an audit report that was issued that limited their ability to use that ISD background check as a stand-in for the childcare required background check. So that is one of the challenges that we do have to continue to consider. All right. We also have a discussion about PreK Partnerships as well as scholarships for early childhood degrees and alternative certification options given the requirements of House Bill 3 that could build a much bigger PreK partnership qualified workforce from current childcare staff. I think that's a good observation. Those alternative certifications for teachers is an area that certainly we can look into as part of our PreK partnership work. All right, I think I have gone through most of the comments. We do have a comment about opportunities for wage supplementation or stipend, and not just for education, as an area that should be explored. All right, Allison, do you see anything else that I have missed?
I do not.
All right, we still have a few minutes, and for all of you saying thank you to us, we really do want to thank you. I think it's really important that we hear from you as we're making these decisions. Again, this is going to be posted on our website so that folks that weren't able to attend today's webinar will be able to see this recording. All right, Allison, any other comments that you want to highlight?
No, I will say that I think that this is already posted on our website, so I'm going to add that link to the chat as well.
Thank you. Next step. So let me tell everyone, we are still waiting for some guidance from the feds. We know we have a plan due. The law says 60 days from enactment. So the law was enacted December 27th. That means that our plan is due in February, but we still haven't received any details on exactly what that plan needs to contain. We do have, as I mentioned, we have through fiscal year 2023 to spend the funds. That's not saying that we want to take that long to spend the funds. I think we certainly need to consider which strategies need to be acted upon immediately. My initial inclination is that those grants to all providers is likely the first thing that we'll focus on. That's something that we haven't been able to do in the past. That first round of funding that we received, the $371 million, while that sounds like a lot of money, we've basically budgeted all of that. And there just wasn't enough money to really consider how do we provide support to all providers. $1 billion certainly offers a lot more flexibility in this area. So I think that will be our first area that we look at. All of these activities, all of the input that you're providing will go into whatever this draft plan looks like, and we'll certainly work with our 3 commissioners, and all of the activities that we invest in will come before our commission for formal approval. So this is sort of our opportunity to hear from you to help us develop these plans for consideration by our 3 commissioners. There is a question, is there a risk that the legislature might redirect these funds to non-child care related activities? No, these funds are part of the Child Care Development Block Grant, so they do have to be spent on allowable child care activities. I mean, as I said at the beginning, they're very flexible with a few directives. Those directives on non-supplantation of state general revenue, grants to all providers, technical assistance on the availability of these funds. So we do have some directives from the feds, but then we have a lot of flexibility on what we do with the rest of the money. All right, let me ask one more call for any verbal comments. All right, and then please continue putting your thoughts into the chat. This is helpful because it helps us record all of this input. We continue to see some stuff coming in about support for some of those possible priorities for the use of funds. There is a question about, will this be equally distributed for nonprofit and for-profit centers? The grants to all providers, what we're considering is potentially a calculated grant amount based upon the size of the provider. So those grants would be distributed. That methodology would be the same regardless of whether you were a nonprofit or a for-profit. And then, Allison, I see that we have a comment. Somebody asked a question about playground grants. So I have not seen that in the chat, but we'll certainly look at that as we're re-reviewing all of the input that we received. We have an echo to a prior comment about wage supplementation and stipends and helping to encourage a career lattice for ECE professionals. And then we had a final question, are grants based on licensing status? Again, we don't have official guidance from the feds, but what we read in the law is that grants should be made available to eligible CCDF providers. And so if you would be eligible to participate in the subsidy program, then you would be eligible for that grant. There is a question about the minimum wage and the potential increase to the minimum wage, which could result in weekly tuition increasing. I think that is certainly going to be a challenge. If we put it, again, if the one-time grants that would be distributed to childcare programs could be used for personnel expenses. And so that grant funding, that would be an allowable use of those grant funds. I will say, generally speaking, prior to COVID, I don't know exactly what the data looks like post-COVID with a lot of program closures, but prior to COVID, childcare subsidies accounted for about 12% of all licensed capacity in Texas. And so clearly we're an important part of the market, but other private pay parents are the vast majority of the childcare market. So just something to keep in mind as we think about the scale of the subsidy program itself. Now, this $1 billion influx in these one-time grants will provide an opportunity for us to issue grants to all providers. And again, we have to look at exactly how much those grants will be, what percentage of these funds will be dedicated to that effort. All right. I think I've covered most of all of the comments that have come in. Again, Allison included that email address that we have posted on our website. This PowerPoint presentation is taken from that document that we shared in the meeting invitation. That document is posted on our website under our childcare webpage, Stakeholder Input. And Allison has again posted its CCEL, which is Childcare and Early Learning, at twc.texas.gov. All right. We will leave the chat open for a few minutes in case there are any closing thoughts that folks want to share with us. Again, we thank you for joining us today and providing this input. It's going to be important as we're strategizing on the investment of these funds. It's an exciting time And we're really hopeful that this big infusion of funds is really going to help both providers and parents in this difficult time. So thank you guys very much. And we'll keep you posted as things progress. Have a good Friday and a good weekend. And for those of you watching the Super Bowl, enjoy it. All right. Thanks, everybody.